So, um, Aristotle actually figured out this secret about the human brain, like over 2,000 years ago.
Right.
And it's something that Hollywood screenwriters literally use every single day.
Right.
But for some reason, we just completely forget it the second we step into, conference room or log on to a virtual town hall.
Oh, absolutely. It's instantly gone.
Right. Because you know the exact scenario.
Mm-hmm.
This speaker taps the microphone, clears their throat, and says something like, thank you all for being here. Today we're going to discuss the Q3 operational realignment.
And you're done.
Instantly, your brain just packs its bags and leads. You're suddenly thinking about what you're going to make for dinner. Or
that email you forgot to send.
Exactly. So today's deep dive is all about the devastating cost of a boring opening.
Yeah.
And more importantly, how to fix it before you lose your audience permanently.
It's just such a universal problem, because the human brain is essentially a predictive machine.
Okay, a predictive machine.
Yeah, and when it predicts that the next 30 minutes will just be, standard corporate or bureaucratic throat clearing, it just powers down to conserve energy.
Wow, just completely powers down.
Right, so the speaker might have spent weeks gathering all this brilliant data for their presentation, but, the data becomes totally irrelevant if the audience has already checked out.
Which brings us to today's source material. We're looking at this fascinating rhetorical framework that actually takes the craft of fiction writing, literally the psychological tools that novelists and screenwriters use, and adapts them directly into speech writing.
Yeah, it's really clever.
And the entire mission of this framework is to uncover the mechanics of making an audience actually care, right? Before you even introduce a single logical argument.
Exactly. Because in classical rhetoric, this whole phase of persuasion, it's called the exordium.
The exordia.
Right, the opening of a speech. And the core philosophy here, which goes all the way back to Aristotle, is that you have to prime the emotion before the logic can do its work.
Pathos before logos.
Precisely. If the audience doesn't feel that something is genuinely at risk, your facts, your figures, those meticulously crafted spreadsheets, they're just going to bounce right off them.
They just won't care.
No. The emotion is the vehicle that actually carries the logic into the brain.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So by the end of this deep dive, you are going to possess a really practical toolkit to instantly command attention and raise the stakes in literally any persuasive scenario.
Any scenario at all.
Yeah, like you can use this in a boardroom, a debate, or just, pitching a new workflow to your team. So let's start with the anatomy of a stake, because this is where the ancient philosophy really intersects with modern storytelling.
Right.
Because in a movie, a stake is, it's what the main character stands to lose, right?
Agreed.
Like if the hero doesn't defuse the bomb, the city gets destroyed.
Right. That is the classic narrative definition. But in a speech or a presentation, the framework says you need this crucial psychological shift.
Okay, what kind of shift?
The stakes have to be what the audience stands to lose. Or, potentially gain if the issue goes unaddressed. You have to take that threat out of the abstract and place it squarely in the laps of the people actually listening to you.
Oh, I see. So it's like a movie where if the bomb goes off, the viewer's house blows up.
Yes.
Not just the action hero's house. You have to put the listener right inside the blast radius.
That is an incredibly vivid way to visualize it. You really do. Before you write a single line of an opening, you have to interrogate the issue from the audience's perspective.
Like asking what they specifically lose.
Exactly. What is lost, concretely, if nothing changes?
Yeah.
How does inaction alter things for the worse, in actual lived terms? You're basically searching for the single thread that the entire argument hangs on.
Okay, I see how that works if you're talking about like a massive financial collapse or a literal war. The blast radius is pretty obvious there.
Sure.
But I kind of want to push back on how broadly this applies. Because what if you're presenting something inherently dry? Say it's just a procedural change to a municipal zoning ordinance or, a minor software update for your department.
Right.
There's no villain there. There's no ticking bomb.
Yeah.
So how on earth do you put a viewer in the blast radius of a zoning ordinance?
Well, the source text actually anticipates this exact problem because every issue, no matter how mundane it seems, has an opposing force.
Okay.
It just rarely looks like a mustache-twirling villain.
Right.
The opponent could be a rigid historical policy or an outdated institution or, honestly, merely the status quo.
Just the way things are.
Exactly. You run those exact same questions against the opposing side to see what they are protecting. And that forces you to understand the actual mechanics of why the problem exists in the first place.
Oh, I get it. Because understanding of the opposing force stops you from building a straw man argument.
Precisely.
Like, you can't just stand up and say, the old software is evil.
Yeah.
You have to understand that, well, the old software is comfortable.
Yes.
Or it's deeply integrated into how people do their jobs.
Exactly. And if there's no clear policy or institution pushing back, the antagonist is usually just apathy.
Just people not caring.
Indifference is its own massive gravitational force. Like, if the opposing force is human laziness, you have to frame the cost of that laziness. Apathy is often the heaviest object in the universe to move.
It really is.
So if you don't map out the toll that this collective tiredness is taking on the organization or the community, you just have no tension.
But logically identifying that an audience might lose something to apathy, that's one thing. Logically knowing something and actually feeling it, those are entirely different experiences.
Oh, 100%.
Like, if I tell you that a new tax code might marginally decrease a departmental budget over 5 years, you might nod in agreement, but your heart rate isn't going up, you know?
Right. The facts alone just don't move the needle.
So how do we bridge that gap?
Well, that gap between knowing and feeling, that's where the psychological engine of this framework really takes over. The text outlines these specific emotional levers designed to translate a logical stake into an emotional reality.
Okay, emotional levers. What's the first one?
One of the primary levers is fear, but there's a major caveat here. You have to move past obvious surface-level fears.
Surface level being something like, if we don't do this, we'll lose money.
Right. Losing money is just the symptom. The deeper fear beneath that symptom might be losing agency, losing your independence, or watching a community you built slowly erode because of underfunding. The framework suggests you have to name that deeper existential fear directly.
So don't tell me my wallet will be lighter. Tell me I won't have the freedom to make my own choices about how to run my department.
Exactly.
Yeah, that hits completely differently. But wait, what if the audience isn't afraid? What if they're just incredibly arrogant or totally blind to the reality of the situation?
Then that requires pulling a different lever. You have to target their collective flaws or blind spots.
Okay, target their flaws.
Yeah, you ask what shared human tendency is allowing this issue to persist. Like, are we suffering from chronic short-termism? Is it complacency? Are we placing misplaced trust in a broken system?
But wait, if I stand up in front of a room of my peers, or worse, my bosses, and point out their flaws.
Right.
Like saying something like, you are all too complacent. Won't they immediately just get defensive and tune me out? That feels like a massive risk.
It is a massive risk if you deliver it as an accusation.
Okay.
The text explicitly warns against shaming the audience. The psychological goal here is what they call productive discomfort.
Productive discomfort. How do you do that without accusing them?
You achieve it by framing the flaw as a shared tendency, explicitly including yourself in it. The audience needs to recognize themselves in the problem organically, almost like an epiphany.
Oh, I see. So you would say, we've all gotten too comfortable with this outdated process rather than, you are all lazy.
Exactly. The inclusion of the speaker using we softens the blow while still maintaining the sting of the truth.
It lowers their shield.
It lowers their defensive shields just enough for the idea to get through.
That's smart.
And there's another deeply effective emotional lever here, which is regret.
Regret, okay.
Instead of looking at what is happening right now, you project the audience forward in time and ask what they will regret not doing when they look back on this specific moment.
So you're essentially borrowing the pain of the future and bringing it into the present.
Yeah.
That converts this abstract, distant issue into a really immediate emotional stake.
Right, because it relies on a well-documented psychological principle called loss aversion.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, humans are evolutionarily wired to feel the pain of losing something roughly twice as powerfully as the pleasure of gaining something of equal value.
Wow. Twice as powerfully.
Yeah, so regret is basically the emotional manifestation of a permanent, avoidable loss. When you frame an issue around future regret, the brain processes it as an immediate threat to its future well-being.
Okay, so we have the logical stake, and we have these emotional levers: fear, shared flaws, and regret. Right.
But, to get the audience to put their phones down right now, in this exact second, we need urgency. How do we compress their attention so they feel compelled to listen today rather than just putting it off until tomorrow?
That's where we ratchet up the tension using devices borrowed straight from narrative craft.
Like what?
One of the most ubiquitous is the ticking clock.
Ah, classic.
Giving the issue a hard deadline narrows cognitive bandwidth. It forces the brain to stop optimizing for the long term and focus entirely on the immediate environment.
The ticking clock is literally everywhere in Hollywood. Like, you have 24 hours to save the world.
Exactly.
But applying a ticking clock to a parliamentary session or a corporate budget meeting, that is brilliant. It's like a way to inject adrenaline into a spreadsheet.
It really is.
You could say, like, by the time this debate ends, 3 more families will have lost their homes.
Yes. Urgency compresses attention. Another narrative device they talk about is survival framing.
Survival framing. This involves demonstrating what happens when foundational security is stripped away. And it doesn't have to be physical security. It can be financial, professional, or social stability.
So shaking their foundation.
Right, because when an audience senses instability beneath their feet, they physically and mentally lean in. Instability demands a resolution. Our biology basically demands that we find solid ground.
So it's like taking the chair they are sitting on away from them, rather than just threatening to hit them with a stick.
That's a great way to put it.
They have to rebalance immediately. They cannot ignore the fact that the floor is suddenly gone.
Exactly. That biological imperative to rebalance is incredibly powerful. But the third tension device the text explores moves away from physical or financial survival entirely and focuses on collective identity.
Okay.
It frames the issue around reputation and dignity. This is the tension of who we say we are versus what we actually tolerate.
Oh, wow.
When your belief system or your reputation is challenged, your attention sharpens incredibly fast.
That is so interesting. This mechanism in the source document, the dignity at stake, framing it, functions completely differently than fear or a ticking clock.
How so?
Well, fear and urgency are essentially external threats bearing down on you from the outside.
Right.
The clock is ticking in the room, or the financial ruin is coming for the company from the outside.
Right. But dignity framing relies on internal tension.
Internal tension.
Specifically cognitive dissonance. It holds up a mirror. You take an identity that the audience already claims for itself, and then you simply present concrete evidence that contradicts that identity.
Oh, that's brutal.
The discomfort comes entirely from within.
So the tension isn't something bad is going to happen to you. The tension is you are not currently who you say you are.
Exactly. And escaping that specific type of internal tension is incredibly difficult.
I bet.
Because to resolve the dissonance, the audience really only has 2 choices. They either have to change the contradictory evidence by taking the action you are proposing,
Or they have to abandon their claimed identity.
yes, which costs them immense social and personal face.
And it's basically the rhetorical equivalent of a parent saying, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed.
Yes, exactly.
But you set up the juxtaposition so smoothly that the audience is actually saying it to themselves. It's self-inflicted disappointment.
But done well, it is distinct from a guilt trip.
How is it not a guilt trip?
Because the speaker isn't imposing their own moral standards on the room. The audience already set the standard themselves.
Oh, I see.
You hear it in corporate slogans like, our company puts the customer first, or political rhetoric like, we are a city that takes care of its own.
Yeah.
As a speaker, you are just pointing silently at the gap between their slogan and their reality.
But I mean, executing that without it blowing up in your face has to require some nuance.
Yeah.
If you mishandle it, you just sound totally self-righteous.
Oh, absolutely. That's why the text outlines a very specific structural flow to avoid that defensiveness.
Okay, what's the flow?
You begin by naming the identity or standard the audience explicitly claims. Then, you present the concrete evidence that contradicts it.
Okay.
But the evidence must be undeniable and grounded in reality, not just some abstract philosophy. And then comes the most crucial part.
What is it?
You let the contradictions sit for a beat. You pause. You do not over-explain it.
You let the pause do the heavy lifting.
Yes.
The silence allows that discomfort to marinate.
The pause forces the audience to connect the dots themselves. And finally, you close the opening by reframing the choice. You don't ask, what should we do to fix this? You ask, which version of ourselves is actually true?
Oh, that's powerful. But this completely backfires if you just bluntly accuse them of hypocrisy, right?
Completely.
Like if I stand up and say, you claim to value transparency, but you are all a bunch of liars,
Yeah.
the doors slam shut, defensiveness takes over,
Yeah.
the persuasion is just dead.
Right, because it collapses into a personal attack rather than a reflection of reality.
Yeah.
It also falls flat if you invoke an identity the audience doesn't actually hold. Like, if you are speaking to a panel of outside objective financial auditors and you try to appeal to an emotional, community-based identity they just don't share, it will fail.
That makes sense.
In rooms prioritizing pure data, fear of regulatory failure or the urgency of a ticking clock pulls much harder. Dignity framing lands hardest in institutional, civic, or values-based environments where reputation is an actual live currency.
Okay, so we have all these high-level psychological tools now. We know how to identify the audience in the blast radius, map the opposing force of apathy, pull the emotional levers of regret and shared flaws, and, ratchet up the tension with a ticking clock or a dignity gap.
Right, it's a lot of tools.
It is. So how do we synthesize all of this and actually write those first few sentences?
Well, the transition from theory to practice requires anchoring the psychological stake to a concrete goal.
A concrete goal.
Yeah, abstract issues raise incredibly weak stakes.
Yeah.
You cannot aim for a goal as broad as achieving justice or fostering innovation.
Too vague.
Way too vague. Those concepts are too big to trigger immediate psychological tension. The goal has to be what is immediately in front of the audience, like pass this specific clause today, or approve this budget reallocation.
So you have to ground the lofty ideas into the immediate physical reality of the room.
Exactly. Once the goal is concrete, you name the cost of failure plainly. It doesn't need to be an immediate catastrophe. It can be a delayed consequence, like a bad policy today shaping outcomes for an entire generation, provided the audience can vividly picture it.
Right.
And then you have to personalize it to the specific people in the room.
Because stakes are highly subjective.
Right. Completely.
Like a missed policy deadline might just be a minor inconvenience to a regional manager, but it is an absolute existential crisis to the citizen who is depending on that policy to get health care.
Right.
So your job isn't to just yell, "This is high stakes." Your job is to frame the issue so the specific audience sitting in front of you feels how close the blast radius is to what they value.
That's exactly it. And there's a common trap here.
What's the trap?
Speakers often feel that to maintain attention, they need to constantly manufacture bigger and scarier stakes line by line.
Just escalating the threat.
Right, escalating until it becomes totally melodramatic. But the framework counters this instinct. Stakes do not need to escalate vertically to stay effective.
So what do you do instead?
You move horizontally, reinforcing the exact same stake by restating it horizontally, using a new image, a new perspective, or a new real-world example, does vastly more work than inventing some catastrophic, unbelievable threat.
I love that. And actually, the source provides some fantastic real-world templates that walk through this flow beautifully.
Yes, they're great examples.
It starts with a cold stake, grounds it in reality, introduces the fear or regret, adds urgency, and then builds a bridge to the main argument.
Let's look at one of their examples dealing with a notoriously dry topic.
The bureaucratic governance motion.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that example opens immediately on the cold stake without any throat clearing at all. It says, somewhere in this country tonight, a citizen is filing a complaint that will never be read. Boom. Right in.
Right. It then grounds that abstract concept in the mechanics of the problem. Not because no one cares, because the system meant to receive it has no legal obligation to respond.
And then it introduces the deeper fear. Let me read it. That is the quiet stake of this motion. Not corruption we can point to, but the slower harm of a public that stops bothering to complain at all.
It's so good.
The stake isn't the missing paperwork. The stake is a public that simply gives up. That is terrifying.
It shifts the focus from the paperwork to the soul of the civic body.
Yeah.
Then it adds urgency. Every session this goes unaddressed, that habit of silence gets a little more permanent. And finally, it bridges to the actual thesis of the speech. This House believes that accountability delayed is accountability denied.
It takes something so deeply bureaucratic and makes it feel visceral.
It really does.
There's another example they give regarding youth governance, addressing something really abstract, like national debt. It starts with the cold stake. In 5 years, the people making decisions about this country's debt will be people currently too young to vote on it. Then it grounds it in a single image. A 16-year-old in a classroom today inherits a budget she never had a say in shaping.
Notice the horizontal movement there.
Right.
It takes the macro issue of national debt and grounds it in the concrete reality of one student in a classroom. The scope narrows, which makes it so much easier for the human brain to process the emotional weight.
And then it follows up with the regret lever. The stake isn't abstract exclusion. It's a generation later asking why no one thought to ask them first. I know, it pulls that future anger right into the present. Then the urgency. The window to include their voice is this policy cycle, not the next one, and the bridge. That is why youth participation in fiscal planning cannot wait for adulthood to arrive first.
In both of those examples, the speaker opens on the stake, not the topic. Thank you for having me is entirely absent.
Nobody cares that you're happy to be there.
Exactly. They make the abstract concrete with a single image. They name the underlying fear or regret, totally refusing to settle for the surface consequence. And they insert urgency organically, without overstating the case.
And if we look back at the Dignity Deep Dive, the text provides an incredible worked example of how to execute that cognitive dissonance maneuver.
Oh, the dignity gap example is fantastic.
It really is. It starts by naming the claimed identity. There is a version of this country we claim to be proud of, one that keeps its promises to its own citizens. Then it just drops the contradictory evidence. And then there is the version on record, files closed without answers, complaints that vanish into silence, a public that has learned not to expect a response.
And that is exactly where the speaker must pause. You let the gap between the pride and the silence just hang in the air.
Let them feel it.
Exactly, forcing the audience to process the contradiction.
Then the reframe. Every time we let that gap widen, we are not just failing a policy. We are quietly deciding which version of ourselves is actually true. That is the real question before this House tonight. Not whether this reform is convenient, but whether we still recognize ourselves in the answer.
It's brilliant.
It refuses the easy exit. You can't just brush off the reform by saying it's too expensive, because doing so means admitting you aren't who you claim to be.
It completely corners the audience psychologically, but in the best possible way.
Yeah.
So to synthesize this toolkit for your next presentation, a successful persuasive opening is never about stating facts or warming up the room.
Never.
It is about immediately showing the audience exactly what they stand to lose, tying it to a concrete goal, and using either productive discomfort or dignity framing to make it intellectually and emotionally impossible for them to look away.
You pull them right into the blast radius for the very first breath.
So before your next high-stakes conversation, run a quick self-check on your opening lines.
What should they ask themselves?
Ask yourself, does the listener know within the first two sentences what they stand to lose? Have you made that consequence personal to them rather than just objectively important?
Right.
Is there a sense of urgency, or does your phrasing imply they could easily just deal with it next week? If you can confidently answer yes to those questions, your opening will do its job.
So what does this all mean for you as you step back into your daily life? Because the fundamental lesson here is really about doing the emotional groundwork before you present the logical argument.
Exactly.
Think about this the next time someone is trying to sell you an idea, or even the next time you are trying to convince yourself to break a bad habit or start a new project.
That's a great application.
Right. Are they, or are you, skipping straight to the spreadsheets and the data? Are you jumping right into the logical arguments without identifying the underlying fear, the shared flaw, or the future regret?
Because if you don't feel in your gut that something is genuinely at risk, the battle is already lost before the first fact is even spoken.
Yep. Keep an ear out for that cold stake in the world around you. Once you know what it sounds like, you will never hear a speech or sit through a wandering, boring presentation the same way again.